All right, hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Before we get started, do me a favor, hit the bottom, what is this? Your right, my left-hand corner of the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. But today I wanted to talk about LiveScope. It's something that, man, there's been a lot of drama and a lot of people freaking complaining, moaning, all sorts of crap going on in the industry. And it's something that, like, not that you actually care about what I have to say, because I'm just a fishing guide from Western North Carolina, but I've kind of kept my nose out of it for quite some time. But this past weekend, I had fished a tournament, and I ended up not having a great finish. I had won this tournament last time I was in the tournament. And anyways, I didn't have a great finish, and the light bulb went off as to why I didn't have a great finish. There's a few factors in it, but I think one of the biggest ones was purely my reliance on LiveScope. So the reality is here, I did not pre-fish. I did not pre-fish at all for this event. In fact, I hadn't been on the water, on this specific body of water, I think in like 5 or 6 months, maybe longer than that. So I had no preconceived notions going into it. Last time I had fished this tournament, it was wintertime on a herring lake, Fontana Lake, and it was a standard ditch deal. When I say ditch deal, main lake creek channels, or creek channel secondary kind of creeks off of the main lake. These fish kind of get hung up in these ditches, or kind of that last deep water before the main lake, going out, or in the back of the pocket, the deepest water you could find them staged up, kind of corralling herring and bait fish. And that's kind of the standard herring deal. It doesn't matter if you're on Lake Lanier. You guys saw Jason Christie do this in the Bassmaster Classic that he won on Lake Hartwell. But it's a ditch deal where you get out in the ditches, you're scoping around, you're throwing a Kitech, some kind of forward-facing sonar minnow, a Demiki rig, some kind of small bait fish imitator, either let it sink down to them, or maybe they're up in the water column hunting, whatever it is, the ditch deal usually plays. Well, a couple weeks ago, or not even a couple weeks ago, last week, we had a copious amount of rain, just a ridiculous amount of warmer inflowing water, which gave the creeks a little bit of that tint, that good tint that you're looking for when you're looking for fish up shallow. So what happens is the main lake kind of cools, right? So the main lake's like 46, 47 degrees. And then you have this influx of warm rainwater, right? And that's like 51 to 53 degrees. And then you've got cold river water on the back side of it. So you've got cold water, a stretch of warm water, and then cold water on the back end. And this stretch, as the lake, as they're just naturally, it's a reservoir, as they're draining water through the dam, that kind of warm block kind of transition, then eventually cools down with the rest of the lake. But when it is warm and happening, there's a little bit of dinge, which what happens when the water gets dingy? Fish naturally migrate to cover because they need some kind of orientation. They need to have some type of bearing. Hey, where am I? And they'll hold shallow on cover, like rock in this specific body of water. And then it's warmer water. Naturally, fish just like warmer water. It's up in the water column, that bit of water. So they kind of move up, they move shallow, they move to the bank. So naturally, instincts, as a fishing guide, I've been guiding for a decade, instinct should have it, okay, that was the deal. Go up shallow. The guys that did really well, I honestly believe, were throwing a crankbait. And I think about years past when guys weigh in really good bags or have won tournaments on this specific body of water, they're cranking up shallow. They are throwing a jig. They're throwing some sort of power, fishing application technique, whether it's a chatterbait, spinnerbait, crankbait, a jig, something covering water up shallow, mimicking crawfish or bait fish that are up shallow, and those fish are up shallow. But what happened was I got stuck, fishing typical seasonal pattern memories, whatever, and I literally started to just rely on my Panoptics, on my Garmin LiveScope. And I just thought about it, kind of like reverting back, and I'm like, wow, I think without LiveScope, I would have traditionally looked at the conditions of the past week with no pre-fish or anything and said, all right, I have to go find that shallow bite. But what happened was I reverted back to say, hey, I've got a live scope and I can go look at fish all day, and I'm going to try to force feed this technique. Now, I know a couple guys that did that exact deal like I did. We did the ditch deal. We ran the ditch deal. It was not the deal. We all had that 11 to 12 and a half pounds. And here's the deal. The reality is that ditch deal was an early morning thing, and then I think that bite really started to pick up shallow as the day got up, the sun got up, warmed that water, just naturally light penetrating a prism means the top of the water column is going to be warmed a little bit. Those fish are going to come up to shallower water. But what happened was I got stuck looking at my graph and looking at fish, and I totally, instead of using my instincts of just fishing since I was a little boy, my dad teaching me seasonal patterns and me reading Bassmaster and how do fish move and how do fish migrate and how do fish do all these things given conditions, seasonal patterns, so forth. I just reverted back to, I went numb, I turned my brain off, and I just stared at my electronics and plinked around trying to pick off fish here and there. And we caught quite a few fish, but it was not the deal. Now, in years past, I've won this tournament. In fact, I won a few of them in a row, literally staying glued on the Panoptics, the LiveScope, plinking around, looking at big fish, figuring out what they're eating, and really dialing in that bite. And I think I excel at that, don't get me wrong, but I also think I excel at grinding and just figuring out, like, what are the fish doing with the conditions? How do I maximize my size, my quality, and my quantity, and not just take the easy road out and stare at my electronics? But then I got to thinking of something that was even deeper. I think that LiveScope may be ruining young anglers, and this is why. I think about guys that are anywhere from maybe 20 years old and younger. The last 4 years, they've just kind of infiltrated this technology on the generation. And don't get me wrong, they're great with it. If you look at the ages of pros, it's going down. You could argue that they're in better shape. You could argue that they're better at technology. You could argue with mommy and daddy got more money. I don't know what you want to argue. There's a lot of factors that play into that. You can argue live, Bassmaster Live. But the reality is here is they are relying on their electronics. Like, I can't confirm this, but I would say if a 12-year-old gets into bass fishing right now, he turns on YouTube, he watches Ben Milliken stuff, he watches my stuff, he watches a bunch of different people's stuff, he's going to see a lot of LiveScope videos. They have the opportunity to do the research on seasonal patterns, and maybe they have the experience to go out and say, like, hey, fish are doing this, and they should be doing this, and they should be doing that, or they shouldn't be doing this because of that. But here's the deal. They've just literally, they're growing up looking at electronics, reading electronics. And let me tell you something, as valuable as electronics are, they do not paint the full picture. In this past tournament, I totally fell victim to just looking at my electronics when I should have chased an instinctual seasonal pattern. Full moon, warmer water, wintertime, bluffy rock walls. Man, in fact, as in the tournament, I literally, the last hour, I picked up a crankbait, caught a couple fish, saw 3 crawdads up shallow on rock, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I have almost digressed as an angler to just rely on my electronics instead of fishing what I know to be quality seasonal patterns that produce really big fish. In fact, I've won tournaments on this body of water doing the exact thing that I should have been doing. Shallow cranking, throwing a wiggle wart, shad wrap, other crankbaits that get bit in those given conditions. So I know I fell victim to it. And if I'm falling victim to it as a veteran fishing guide, I've been a guide for a decade, I know youngsters are falling into it because here's the deal. I'm 30 years old. They didn't necessarily grow up without electronics like I did. I had to figure out seasonal patterns. What are the fish doing? Why should they be here? Reading topo maps and really dialing in instinctual patterns and using my experience in some regard. But I did use my history, and I fished history, which wasn't great, but then I really relied on my electronics. And like I said, I almost felt dumb. Now, here's the deal. Here's the deal. With Ben Milliken, one of my really great friends. I mean, I talk to Ben all the time. I don't know Randy Blaukat if I've ever seen Randy Blaukat, but I've listened to quite a bit of their stuff. And I think both of these guys have very valid points. Randy's kind of argued exactly what I'm saying, hey, it's kind of like dumbing down anglers. He's also said it's bad for fisheries. I don't necessarily think that, and Ben's kind of like pro LiveScope. And here's the deal: I'm pro LiveScope. I love my LiveScope. I couldn't imagine guiding without it. Just the experience level I'm able to provide customers on a day in and day out basis. All my guides that guide for dream catchers. But the reality is you have to not only, it's a tool, right? It's not only look at my LiveScope and just cast at things that I'm seeing. It's what are the fish actually doing? What are the big fish actually doing? And maximizing both your experiential evidence as to what they're doing and maximizing your electronics. So the electronics are tools. What happens, and what so many people I think have fallen into in the last little bit, is exactly what's happened to me. Is they're like, oh man, I hadn't pre-fished in a while. I can just look at my LiveScope, go out and do my thing. And although that is a great way to have very solid finishes and win tournaments, like I said, I've won tournaments doing it. I think a lot of times you're looking for the quantity of bites because you're seeing all those fish. You're trying to catch more fish. And the reality is just a good old-fashioned grinder bite, like throwing a jig up shallow or flipping or cranking and not worrying about your electronics or throwing a big swim bait or whatever it is. I think that's how you win a lot of tournaments. So does LiveScope help you win tournaments? 100%. Does LiveScope make you lose tournaments? 100%. Does grinding help you lose or help you win tournaments? 100%. Does grinding help you lose tournaments? 100%. I mean, these are tools, and ultimately we just have to become more effective at knowing when to rely on it and when not to rely on it. Nothing I did was necessarily wrong, except for the conditions that I was doing it were wrong. Thus, that was the finish I had. And the couple guys I talked to, we all were like, you offshore fish, didn't you? You offshore fish. Yeah, we all did. And we all got our butts kicked. Where the guys that excelled were up there shallower water, really dialing in that shallow water deal. And they won. Now, a couple weeks from now, there's another derby out there. Yeah, it might be the deal, being out offshore or whatnot. But I know that LiveScope is definitely affecting the quality. Like when I think about hunting, I call it woodsmanship. I don't know what you would call it, watermanship. I don't know what you would call it as far as an anglermanship or angling. I don't know, but it's like at some point, just like a lot of people have just relied on cell cams now to figure out how to kill big deer, and they don't read sign, they don't do these things. I think the same thing happens with LiveScope. A lot of anglers just get stuck looking at their LiveScope. They lose their instinctual ability to make decisions based on conditions, and then it obviously affects their results. So anyways, it was just a thought that I had moving forward. I love LiveScope. I'm not actually getting rid of LiveScope, but it's something to think about. It is a tool, and you have to know when to use a tool on any given job, any given day, whatever, whether you're building houses, whether you're a mechanic, whatever. There's always a time and place for a tool. You can't use that tool on every freaking project, and that's the way LiveScope is. That's the way fishing is. It's a great tool. It's not to be used all the time. That is a lesson I'm having to relearn as a veteran guide, someone that's done it for a decade. But anyways, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. I want to hear your opinions. Leave your comments below, and look forward to seeing you guys next time. I'm out. See you guys.